Greetings and welcome to part 2 of the Genre Grinder look at the giant monster movies of 1957. In part 1, we discussed why there were so many giant monster movies in 1957 and also covered 20 Million Miles to Earth, Attack of the Crab Monsters, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and we actually had to end it on Kronos. There's a lot more to go, so this is our second recording. Technically, we recorded a bunch of other stuff, but it was already 2 hours. So I'm not exactly sure how much we're going to get into this one, but there'll be a part 3, I promise. But before we get started, Patrick wanted to add a couple notes to our intro last month or week.
Yeah. On the first episode of this series, I sort of gave a little table setting of culturally the context of where we were and why all these movies were coming out and why 1957 was the peak and why they went away. And there's a very crucial part of that totally slipped my mind, and that is that 1957 is the year that Screen Gems, which was Columbia Pictures' television division, they had gotten the rights to all of these classic Universal horror movies, and they packaged them together to sell to different television stations in a package called Shock Theater. And the famous thing about Shock Theater is that it was the first time so many of these classic movies like Frankenstein, The Mummy, Dracula, like the really big Universal films, it was the first time they were on television, and a lot of these TV stations got this package, and the way that they competed with each other was they sort of developed programming around the movies, and that was the birth of like the horror movie hosts. So like the Elviras of the world, the Svengoolies, the Vampiras, Zachary, all of this comes from this Shock Theater package. And the other thing that comes from this Shock Theater package is a generation of kids who now have a renewed interest in Gothic horror. And it's sort of this combined with, famous monsters of Filmland happening around this time sort of sets the stage for a Gothic horror revival to happen in the late 50s, early 60s, sets the stage for, these Hammer films to do great in America, for, Roger Corman to do his Edgar Allan Poe movies, and basically put the nail in the coffin of the sci-fi atomic age giant monster movie. So that is the exact same year we're talking about, 1957. And I do believe that played a crucial part of the beginning of the end for these kinds of movies. And I would be regretful if I did not bring that up. I was about to say I would be remiss, and I remembered that remiss is one of those words that people say everyone uses wrong, and I got nervous because I don't know if I know the right way to use it. So I would have felt regret had I not told you about the Shock Theater package, and now I have.
And I guess we got a correction on off that cuff kind of comment we made.
That's right.
We referred to Walt Whitman as the writer of
Walden,
and it was actually
Henry David Thoreau, I think.
So thanks to our friend, that was
Robert Reinecke. Yeah.
What's his podcast called?
His podcast is called Keep Watching the Skies.
There. So thank you, Rob. Everybody listen to Rob's show.
I apologize. Still Watching the Skies.
Still Watching the Skies.
His podcast. Keep Watching the Skies is the quote that the podcast title is referencing.
Right.
I'm sure that they have covered a fair number of the movies we're going to be talking about because they are a sci-fi oriented podcast.
Yeah, it makes sense. So
thanks for that, Robert.
Yes, thank you, Robert. I also just want to have short warning that I got COVID and I'm mostly over it now, but it is possible that, that it sort of dries your throat out. So I've got cough drops and things nearby because this will probably at least take a couple hours to get through.
And this is Editing Gabe popping in real quick to apologize for the fact that this was 2 different audio recordings, so the sound quality will be different in about a second here from the intro, and then after about an hour it will change again to sound more like what it sounded like during the intro. And that it was very hot, we both had fans going, and we didn't think it would pick up on the recordings, but when you compare it to the newer recordings when we didn't have fans running, it's very clear that there are fans running. So I apologize for that. and the fact that I am in a second here going to reference something that happened in the other recording. So hopefully you listen to that recording first. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so that one's good. And then I was hopeful that one would be good because it just sounded more interesting. And so one that I actually liked that I was not hopeful would be good is The Deadly Mantis, which is directed by Nathan H. Juran again.
The director of 20 Million Miles to Earth.
Very different movie from 20 Miles to Earth. Different studios, too. I would have thought this, you make two giant monster movies in a year that it would have been like a package deal, but I guess that's not how it worked. This one's very simple. A giant prehistoric praying mantis recently freed from an Arctic ice block ferociously preys on American military and the DEW line and works its way south. And that's a train line. It's not the best description, but that's pretty much what happens. There's none of that Harryhausen vibe to this one, I don't think.
No.
It's as much more kind of chaotic. This one wants to be more of a horror film, too, I think. You have a history of praying. There is a praying mantis in Son of Godzilla. I think that kaiju's name is Kamakuras, but that would be 10 years after this. So I think this is our first ever case of a giant praying mantis in a movie. There would, of course, be one in Dario Argento's fantastic Dracula adaptation that very realistically rendered in very expensive CG. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. That is a heck of a film. Anyway, this is our first giant bug, too. But there's going to be a lot of them.
For me, the most notable thing about this movie is the special effect of the Deadly Mantis was they built a giant bug.
Yeah.
The thing that... what's his name? Who did the King Kong remake? Dino De Laurentiis.
Yeah.
The thing that Dino De Laurentiis tried to pass off as true, but was patently untrue about the 1970s King Kong movie, was that he built a animatronic that was like kaiju sized.
Yeah.
When in fact most of that movie is Rick Baker in a suit. I don't want to say that the Deadly Mantis is like a amazing animatronic on the the level of detail of like Stan Winston's T-Rex in Jurassic Park or anything. Its mobility is pretty limited, but like an advantage of building a 200-foot long giant monster prop made out of like paper mache is that you can just shoot the giant monster prop next to buildings, and suddenly you got a giant monster that's bigger than a building.
Yeah, and the photography makes it different in a lot of these shots. It's pretty good. It works. I think it works. It's
cool. It was an ambitious choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. My note is that I never found of all the bugs in the world, I think that mantises. I don't know if I can trust because I'm not afraid of spiders and stuff, but I feel like mantises are like one bug that the world has decided is cute. So
I have always been scared of mantises.
Have you? Okay.
Mantises have bodies that look like killing is the number one thing that is on their mind.
I suppose we all know that the women eat the men's heads after having sex. That's like the one thing every single person in the world knows about praying mantises. that and that there's a kung fu based on them. Those are.
Yes. The other funny thing about the Deadly Mantis is I think there are like 3 kung fu movies called Deadly Mantis.
Yes, there is actually. I reviewed one recently, a Shaw Brothers film. Yeah.
This is something that happens from time to time in this subgenre that is true of I think at least a handful of these movies we're talking about is sometimes movies don't have plots. Sometimes movies are just monster attacks, and then there's time in between the monster attacks, and people go, "What was that monster? I don't know. Here's a theory. Well, what about this theory? Here's another. Well, there's the monster. Okay, we got a monster now, and." Oh, you're a woman. Do you you love me? Oh, I don't know if I love you. You're a man. I'm a woman. Do you love me? Oh, I don't know. Oh, there's the mantis. Okay.
Yeah.
Like there's not a sense of forward momentum in this movie.
No.
But because I like the model so much, and because I do think praying mantises are genuinely creepy, and because it is so like it's not just like a mantis got hit with radiation and then became 50 feet tall. It's like so big.
Yeah.
And because it's a prehistoric mantis. I really enjoyed it at just on like it's dumb as hell level.
Well, that was the thing is I was expecting dumb as hell, but then every once in a while there'll be a really nice, scary shot of the mantis.
Yeah.
Like there's part, I believe it's sort of appearing before some guys in a car, and it sort of comes out of the gloom, and it was like just a really surprisingly effective shot.
I said earlier that the Deadly Mantis steals a shot from Tarantula, and the scene where in this Arctic military base, all of the men are trying to dance with the one woman. Another common thing is like, again, the idea of like the anxiety of how do we deal with woman in modern society and her place there. People are constantly like, there's a whoa woman here.
Yes.
And a lot of these movies have just like drooling horny men who are like, a woman.
This is by far the worst version of that we saw in any of these.
So you just have a crowded military base full of men who are all like, we want to dance with you, and she's like dancing with all of them, and this mantis sneaks up through this window as the scientists are talking about the mantis, and the idea of this like giant thing sneaking up into the window is very funny, but it is a really cool, effective scare. There's like a couple moments in that same sequence where guys with flamethrowers come out, and you get these like quick camera moves where it's like tracking them as they run away, and you get some like cross cutting and the camera's a lot more kinetic than you ever expect, because again, this isn't a stop motion thing. This isn't a puppet where it's like, well, the only scale part of the puppet we have is a claw. So the only time it can interact with people is when one of them is being grabbed by the claw. And then the rest of it, we kind of have to do two shots where we cut to the giant monster and then cut to the people, or we use optical effects to like put them in the same shot. It's like, no, it's a fucking giant monster. So you can do some action choreography that you normally can't do.
And there's a lot of people who modern audiences would connect this to John Carpenter's version of the Thing. But there's also Thing from Another World stuff. And I think there being basically one woman is part of that. Because that's sort of the Thing from Another World just has the one woman, right?
Right.
Yeah. And it's not, that movie's a little more serious than this movie, but that was something that was on my mind.
That movie also has a sophistication to its sexual tension that this movie and none of the other movies we're covering.
The weird one
but
about
that's Howard Hawks.
The sexual tension. This one's so strange because this is the one I was alluding to earlier, where they hook up the wrong two people. There's actually a lot of the civilian lead, William Hooper, and then there's a paleontologist, Dr. Ned. Marge is the plucky assistant of Dr. Ned, and they have romantic chemistry. It's a sort of Bond Moneypenny kind of respectful flirting thing, but then she ends up with the fucking military guy who gives her all the unwanted advances, and it's really like honestly kind of icky scenes where he's like forcefully kissing her. That really bothered Christine. She was like, "Fuck that guy," and but then they managed to have set up an actually sort of compelling coupling that then they didn't go with. It was very strange, but she still she has a lot of agency in the film, and she's the one who comes up with the idea to do the way that they're trying to track the thing. It's her idea, and the men that she works with, they respect her, and they're like, "Yeah, cool. We named it after her because it was her idea, and it was kind of cool." I liked all that stuff. It was very strange from a sexual politics standpoint.
Yeah, the another common trope in a lot of these movies that has also been true of some of the movies we've already talked about, like 20 Million Miles to Earth. And we mentioned this in Attack of the Crab Monsters, is a lot of these movies start off with narration. Mm-hmm. They start off with this omnipotent narrator just sort of saying vague, bland things about the nature of science or whatever. It's kind of like, have you ever seen a episode of X-Files that's written by Chris Carter? Yeah. You realize that the creator of the X-Files is not the reason the X-Files is good. Yeah. Because Chris Carter always starts his episodes with Mulder giving this like like mealy-mouthed, weird, like vague philosophical babble monologue about the nature of belief or whatever.
Yeah.
That you're like, what? Just stop. Chris Carter, please stop. And this movie has the weirdest of all of the opening narrations, because rather than starting with a globe or starting with space, it starts with a picture of an atlas. So it's a map. And then you push into Mexico, and then you cut to stock footage of volcano explosions. There's no music. There's no narration at this point. Then the narration starts, and the narration just simply says, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And then in the Arctic, because the volcano exploded in Mexico, ice starts to melt in the Arctic, and the Deadly Mantis is revealed. It's kind of almost like Coleman Francis-y, like the way the narration happens in Beast of Yucca Flats.
You're actually simplifying it by a step. It goes into Mexico, then it zooms into Antarctica. That's where the explosion happens. And then in the Arctic, it breaks open. There's like an additional camera move in there too, if I'm remembering it right, because that's what I have in my notes.
And then after the title sequence, it goes back to the. It's like, and then we get to the characters. No. Now we're going to set up the whole thing about like people really need to understand what this radar system is.
Yeah.
It's important exposition that people understand how NATO protects itself from sneak attacks across the Arctic Circle. So we have to like do this almost like wartime Disney cartoon style animation that explains the network of satellites, or not satellites, the network of radar that monitors the skies and airspace of the Arctic.
And it's actually something I almost wish that would have just kept on, because it's this close to being like a mockumentary horror movie. But they finally get through that, and it turns back into more of a regular sci-fi horror movie. But there's like part of me that would like wishes they would have just kept on going and kept up with the narrator and not even really barely given us the characters aren't very important anyway. Have them even less important, and they're just like people that, and then this happened, and then this happened, and on that fateful day we learned about mantises or some shit like that. Like it's just this close to being like an early found footage kind of, or not found footage, mockumentary type thing.
I think the first time you see footage that isn't stock footage, other than like the shots of the Atlas or whatever, but like the first time you see like live action footage that is not stock footage taken from some military documentary or wartime footage or whatever, it's like 10 minutes in and you almost can't identify it. You're like, is this still people at radars like working these equipment? And like the movie's really interested in all the, it's like, this is a hot phone. You can talk to Antarctica in 10 minutes. And like, or you could call Greenland in 15 minutes or something like that. And it's like, at a certain point, you're like, it's like 20 minutes in, and you're like, have I met the main characters of this movie yet?
And I have notes. I noted what they told me on IMDb where all the various war footage and the propaganda stuff was from. But what I thought was the one interesting one is there's footage of Inuit people reacting to the mantis, and it's from a 1933 pre-war German film called SOS Eisenberg, and that was actually Leni Riefenstahl's final film as an actress before she started, directing. So I thought that was kind of a cool factoid that's not so cool. I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, go on.
Speaking of stock footage, I do want to say, like, some of the stock footage of the fighter jets is just like, I don't know why some stock footage I find interesting and some is just like, I roll my eyes and say whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for the next shot of the monster. Like, maybe it's just the way it's edited, but like some of these stock footage, like fighter jet scenes, I'm like, damn, this is fucking exciting.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is that there's a scene where they find an Arctic radar station that has been attacked by this deadly mantis, and they're trying to piece together what's going on. And that scene is taken like whole cloth out of them, where they find the gas station in the middle of the desert that has been attacked and has like a big chunk taken out of the side. And like they're like, why is this sugar exposed? What would be eating the sugar?
Uh-huh.
And that's like the thing about them is you don't get the ant reveal until like 30 minutes in or so. They build up suspense about what is happening and what you're going to see. But the Deadly Mantis, you know immediately that it's a Deadly Mantis. But they still do that like build up suspense. And at one point it's like, now tell me, what insect that eats living things happens to, and it's like, oh, we know this one. It's a Deadly Mantis.
It's like Dora the Explorer. It's like, where's the mantis? You're like, yeah, it's leading us, like Mr. Rogers or something.
Ask yourself, what flesh-eating insect has such a hook? And it's like, I know an insect with a hook. Call on me.
Yeah. I actually looked into this, and there was a Cretaceous era predecessor to the praying mantis. And the good news is that it was called the Santan Mantis axelrode, which is super close to Satan Mantis axelrose.
Which is my my Wi-Fi password.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite drag queen, Satan Mantis axelrose. But the interesting thing about the Satan Mantis is that it wasn't discovered until 2017. So this movie was ahead of its time. Unfortunately, it's about the size of modern praying mantis. It's not the size of a building. It's not even very big for a ancient bug. Like there were fireflies that were like the size of birds.
I find the mantis creepy looking because I just find mantises creepy. I find it interesting that you think that like the internet or whoever has decided that they're cute.
I don't know. I guess I'm really bad because I'm also I have to guess on a lot of stuff because I'm also not afraid of snakes and I actually like snakes, but I know that they really upset some people. So I just have to sort of guess, I think.
I'm not afraid of spiders. I'm not upset by snakes. Mantises and scorpions both really fuck me up.
Not a fan
guess what?
Yeah, scorpions. The worst for me are those giant cockroaches that you get down in Arizona, which are totally harmless, but they just fly into you and stick to you and freak you out. It's like they get in your hair. They're not dangerous, but I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that the only other note I have on this one is that that it is also sort of ahead of its time in the idea that there are now a small collection of horror movies like The Thaw and Blood Glacier that are about global warming, melting ice caps, and there being prehistoric insects specifically and monsters inside the melt. So this isn't a movie about global warming because that wasn't something people were talking about in 1957, but the idea that there are prehistoric things in the Arctic and Antarctic that are just buried and just waiting to come out if the glaciers ever melt is a little ahead of its time.
And there's a division in these movies where it's like, is this monster the product of man or is this monster something that predates man?
Yeah, this movie is definitely pro-human technology. It is, and
oh yeah. The other my last note I have here is that there's a scene, and I wanted to note this and I didn't, but I'm curious about which of these movies do the general public learn about the monster, and which of them is it a secret that only the main characters learn about?
Oh, it's a note I didn't make. Yeah, I should.
Because 20 Million Miles to Earth, obviously that happens in public.
Yeah.
Attack of the Crab Monsters, the general public does not know about them. Incredible Shrinking Man is a celebrity. That's like another weird thing, is that there's a radio broadcast about his death where it's like he embraced life to the very end in a way that's like, that is not what we have seen in this movie. But
and he's writing his memoirs, isn't he?
Yes, so he's become this kind of like celebrity the way a Tom Thumb or many other people who were like in the freak shows at Barnum and Bailey and stuff were celebrities of their day. Kronos obviously exists in the public. Deadly Mantis has a scene specifically where it shows footage of like people gathered around radios, people gathered around TVs, people in public learning about the Deadly Mantis in a way that whenever you see the reveal of, or whenever you see in a movie the American public learning about Sputnik,
Yeah.
That is always the way it's depicted, is like people gathered around a TV in front of an electronics shop, or like people at home, gathered around the radio. It's always this like communal experience of everyone experiencing this together. And I wondered specifically, was the Deadly Mantis trying to evoke Sputnik in that little montage?
That makes sense. I didn't think of it, but that makes sense. Yeah. So, moving from a couple we liked, I don't know how did you feel about the monster from the Green Hell?
It's horrible. I hate it.
It's pretty bad, isn't it?
This is the first one that is just trash.
Yeah.
That is just like no one cared. No one involved in making it had good intentions.
Yeah.
This is a cash-in. And people talk that way about people like Roger Corman.
Yeah.
But like that isn't true. Roger Corman cares. He just knows that in order to keep making movies, he has to keep a profit going. Mm-hmm. That was his deal with AIP, was like his profit from one movie funded the next movie. So he always had another project with them going. He was always on to the next one. So it was just like, it wasn't that he didn't care that the shot was underexposed. It was just like his career was built on the fact that he would not go back and spend more money to correct it. Mm-hmm. But like Monster from Green Hell specifically feels like produced by people who do not care.
Well, this one's directed by Kenneth G. Crane. And the plot is a test rocket carrying wasps to outer space to study the effects of weightlessness and radiations crashes out of control back to Earth into the jungles of Africa. Two astrobiologists in charge of the tests mount an expedition to the, quote, darkest continent to retrieve their experiment, only to find that the wasps have grown to a giant size and are panicking all forms of life in their quest for food. Now, Kenneth G. Crane was mostly an editor, and I'm not clear on the order and timing of things, but I think he got this job after he re-edited Ishihiro Honda's 1955 movie, Jojin Yoko Otoko, which Abominable Snowman or The Beast Man. But they made it under a new title called Half Human. And we ended up not covering it because, as I mentioned, Patrick watched it and it was awful. And apparently it's just a regular size Abominable Snowman. But the idea that
Bigfoot is big, not giant.
Yeah. And then I think he was given his own movie because that worked out. That's just my guess. This came out first, though.
This is a movie that feels more edited than it was directed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just funny to me that maybe probably the two worst movies you watched were from the same director, because I didn't have to watch one of them.
That's right. I watched Half Human, the American re-release of the Abominable Snowman movie, but you did not.
Yeah.
But so this is a movie mostly made up of stock footage of Africa and movies that were shot, decades before.
Yeah.
In Africa. So it's a movie where nothing happens. It's people walking. It's the Clerks 2 synopsis of Lord of the Rings, where it's like it's people walking and then there's a volcano at the end, and the volcano solves the problem, and then that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's a lot of things. It's mostly a jungle adventure movie. Like maybe 80-90% of the movie is that there are monsters. Mm-hmm. There are giant wasps. They are kind of a cool design just because they don't look anything like wasps to me. I kind of appreciate their stupidity of their design.
I was impressed that a movie that made no effort still employed stop motion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
made some big props, some pretty big. They're not Deadly Mantis sized props, but there's some big props.
When we see stop motion in these movies, normally we are seeing the works of masters like Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah. And
like really shitty stop motion is its own kind of compelling, because you're just sort of like, wait a second, why? This this was released in theaters?
Yeah.
Like someone said that was good enough. normally stop motion is, it's associated with artists who have a certain level of craft, and this is stop motion by people who know the basic premise of stop motion.
Yeah. There's the kind of joke about the Raiders of the Lost Ark where everything would have happened the same if Indy wasn't in the movie. This is a really extreme case of that, where everything would have happened the same if none of the humans were in the movie. If they would have just had an hour of footage of just the savannah, and then there would have still been a volcano that took care of the problem for the humans.
We talked about the movies where the monsters are man-made versus the movies where the monster just kind of happens. This is man-made monster. They shoot it into space, and then cosmic rays. They don't use the word radiation. They use cosmic rays. And the spacecraft lands in Africa, and then you learn through suggestion. This is not necessarily explained too well. The passage of time is not depicted, but you learn and then several months later, there is now just sort of this ongoing legend in this part of Africa that this one jungle has monsters in it that eat people, and people go into this part of the jungle, this green hell, and they never come back. At a certain point, the giant wasps are seen. They are mostly shot via that one shot from Godzilla, where the first time you actually see Godzilla, and it's just like a horizon, and then Godzilla peeking over the top of it. Mm-hmm. The giant wasps, which change in size, it's hard to tell exactly what the scale of the giant wasps is supposed to be. They're sort of like cresting over the horizon, and then there's stock footage of animals running away, and then there's it's literally the Ed Wood thing of, but something's startling all the water buffalo. Yeah. By the way, this was released, speaking of Ed Wood, this was released by the Distributors Corporation of America, which was a short-lived film distribution company. These are the same people who distributed Plan 9 from Outer Space in 1957. So this is the level of movie we are talking about.
Them. Yeah.
Big year for the Distributors Corporation of America, DCA. Doing it big in 57.
Well, I just think one of the more disappointing things is they imply that there's a lot more than wasps on that ship that goes up and comes back down, but we only get to see the wasps. They distinctly say that there are guinea pigs and lizards.
Yeah, and
so we have a chance, no matter how bad, to see giant lizards and guinea pigs eating people.
Right. The South Park Cloverfield parody was tantalizingly close to being real.
Yeah. I should say that this is another case where I think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, this is sort of the origin story of the Fantastic Four, where it's about four humans who go up into space and don't they miscalculate cosmic radiation, and they all get cosmically irradiated, and they crash, and they have the powers of the Fantastic Four. I think comic historians, they all say that that's based on Journey to the Center of the Earth. But I don't know, man. Cosmic things. Well, and also this was a real thing where they would send up bugs and stuff to see, and plants to see what would happen to them.
Sure.
Then again, it didn't happen until later. It didn't happen until we had better space technology. This is the 1957. There was not a lot going on yet. As far,
I think it's not hard to presume if there is a space race happening that the chimps and Laika, the wonderful Soviet space dog, are going to be the first into the outer limits of our imagination.
It's also a plot for the episode of The Simpsons where Homer joins NASA. They actually they've taken a colony of ants in with them, and Homer accidentally releases them, and they get into all the instruments. I don't think that the creators of The Simpsons were aware of this movie necessarily, or the writers of The Simpsons, but who knows? Maybe.
I feel like the writers of The Simpsons spent a lot of time watching The Late Late Show.
Yeah.
Growing up as kids, and there's no telling what's bouncing around in their heads. So anyway, spaceship comes down in Africa. There's now giant wasps eating people in Africa. Eventually, these giant wasps are seen by the public, and the scientist is like, hey, remember our wasp that went missing?
Yeah, what? Could be related.
Yeah, we might as well check it out. So they go to Africa, and then they take a month-long safari hike across Africa to get to the point where the bugs are, which is you can't survive that. You are not prepared. You are a astrophysicist. You cannot march a month in the darkest heart of Africa. I should say, now that I use a loaded and perhaps terrible phrase like the darkest heart of Africa, which I should not say, and I apologize for that. That is the tone of the movie that I was expecting. And to Monster from Green Hell's credit, this movie is not generally super racist.
No, the dangerous Africans are basically, the indigenous tribes are basically like native tribes in westerns. Is the one time they attack, it's like a scene from a western where they've gone through the wrong territory. I noted that I think that this is a 4 on the Umberto Lenzi scale of racist depictions of natives.
and Joel Fluellen. I think Joel Fluellen plays sort of the main. He's like the main black actor in this movie, who's playing a local whose brother was killed by one of these monsters, and who is friends with the doctor who sort of journeys and tries to figure out what's going on and goes missing. And that they're sort of on a rescue mission to find this doctor, kind of. To Joel Fluellen's credit. And he is a Hollywood actor who is black and who operated in the 40s and 50s. So if you look at his IMDb credits, it's a lot of porter, cab driver. Yeah. He is a train waiter, that sort of thing. Yeah. That Hollywood would cast a man like him in. But to his credit, he does not do an African accent. He kind of just talks like he was born in Louisiana, and he kind of just talks like a dude from Louisiana.
Yeah. There's a scene where he has a sort of argument with a local doctor about superstition, which again made me think of Lucio Fulci's Zombie, in a very similar scene where they're talking about the possibility of voodoo versus scientific explanation. So
something I learned about Joel Fluellen that endeared me to him greatly was that he was. He sort of joined forces with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People to try to get black actors a better shake in Hollywood. And he was an activist trying to get him and his fellow actors better situations. And they were rebuffed by the Screen Actors Guild, who did not do anything to help these people who were part of their own guild. And the president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time was Ronald Reagan. Yeah. So Joel Fluellen hated Ronald Reagan before any of us. Yeah. He knew who Ronald Reagan was before the rest of us hated Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time. Actually, go on. Sorry.
No, I would just say he was a vanguard.
He was a vanguard. I actually think that for how bad the movie is, that the general cast is actually not as bad as some of the other casts. I think that the Russian actor that plays Dr. Lorenz, Vladimir Sokolov, I think he's actually sort of has a degree of pathos to his role. I kind of liked him. But the lead cast is just insanely low energy. And the Jim Davis is the handsome male lead, not the creator of Garfield, the actor. He is clearly not enjoying himself this whole movie and does not want to be there. And I actually got some joy out of how much he clearly hates everything about this. And that I also gave the filmmakers a little bit of credit for not being racist, because the most racist stuff in the movie is all stock footage from a different older movie called Stanley and Livingston. So there's a little bit of, they didn't make the poor guys act in racist bullshit stuff. But, it's still there. There is so much stock footage in this movie, though, and it's
unbelievable.
It never works. And it doesn't
have stock footage. It's no plot.
And it doesn't have that pseudo documentary thing that makes Deadly Mantis kind of charming. There's none of that.
Right.
There.
It's not stock footage of military hardware. It's stock footage of watering holes and antelope and shit. Yeah. It's a dreadful movie. A couple more fun facts about it. It was written by Andra Bohem and Louis Vietz, who wrote I Married a Monster from Outer Space, another movie that you covered on the Body Snatchers episode. Yeah.
Great movie.
Yeah.
Very well written, interesting movie. I Married a Monster from Outer Space, a lot closer to The Incredible Shrinking Man than Monster from Green Hill.
Yeah.
The female lead is Barbara Turner. That is Jennifer Jason Leigh's mother.
I missed that part. I wrote a note about her, but I missed that part.
She didn't act for too much longer, but she did become a screenwriter of note and was even, we're talking about Academy Award nominations. She was nominated, or no, she wasn't nominated, but she co-wrote Pollock, which was nominated for Academy Awards.
She also co-adapted Cujo was another one.
Yeah.
It was actually a little distracting. She looks so much like old pictures of my grandmother.
And she's notable for looking like Gabe's grandmother.
Yeah.
This is a 1957 film in that it was made and shown for critics in May of 1957, but this was not actually commercially released until 1958. So most websites and stuff will list this as a 1957 film for that reason, that initial screening. But for most practical concerns, it is a 1958 film. We're including it because it's still like made in the sort of cultural soup that all the other movies were made in.
Yeah.
But that's worth noting. And then finally, there was a different climax that was a lot more ambitious, where they had a big cavern filled with like 4 puppet wasps that were all sort of moving around at once. And then lava pours down on them. But what happened was one of the special effects guys was like, that lava doesn't look like lava. There's not enough steam. So he just started chucking dry ice into all of the liquid. And it created so much fog that there were 2 cameras shooting this sequence. One of them was fogged up from the dry ice and couldn't see anything. So none of that footage was usable. The other camera just saw a crew member's arm chucking dry ice in the corner. So that wasn't usable. So the way the climax happens, it's kind of hard to even tell what's happening until a character just narrates what's happening. It's because it's just stock footage of a volcano and then a double exposure of the wasp footage from earlier, like over it. Yeah. It's very weird and very bad. And then it's like, oh, I guess a volcano exploded. And that the reason is because they fucked up the original climax and they weren't going to shoot it again.
I also read that the climax was tinted red for some releases, but that version doesn't exist anymore. I guess you could just tint it red in Photoshop or whatever, but...
So, yeah, what happened is the stock footage of the volcano erupting was color footage. And so for, like, as a gimmick in the climax, they cut to this color volcano footage. Okay. But then when they cut back to the actors, it was shot, that was all those sequences were shot in black and white, so they tinted those actors, like, pink or red or something.
So, like, the volcano effects are still... Okay, I get it. I see.
But unfortunately, the version that was released to TV and the version that you can find like easily on YouTube and stuff like that, none of the color stuff is part of that. So we don't truly know how good Monster from Green Hill is because we failed to find it in its original
it's a lost
compromised
media.
form. I'm not holding my breath for Monster from Green Hill. This movie sucks.
Yeah. All right, so like we said before, the next one in the order on the list would be Quatermass 2. Watch that movie; it's awesome. Listen to
really cool,
the Body
really cool
Snatcher
movie
podcast. Jim and I talked about it a lot. Really good stuff. So then we're going to skip over to another pretty notorious entry here in The Giant Claw by Fred F. Sears. Real quick, I'll just say this is global panic ensues when it is revealed that a mysterious UFO is actually a giant turkey-like bird that flies at supersonic speed and has no regard for life or architecture. That's clearly kind of a joke there, but this is a movie that we already mentioned. Patrick did a lot of research on because it was one of his first tracks of the Damned. And I even did a little bit of research back in the day because this was part of... Arrow Video's Sam Katzman collection. He was the producer on this, I believe, or he was the producer on this.
He's the producer.
And so I didn't actually rewatch this one, I have to admit. This is one of the ones we meant to watch that I did not rewatch because I felt like I had seen it most recently. But that means I have not a lot of notes on it. So I'm going to kind of let Patrick take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I mean, This is a movie whose reputation is entirely earned.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me actually make this like an interview. Why did
Sure
you
thing.
decide that this was the movie you needed to do a commentary track on for the first ever episode of your commentary track podcast?
Well, okay, I'm glad you asked that. It was
Okay.
two things. One was I didn't know how good at it I would be, and I didn't want to blow it on a movie that was good. So I didn't want to like do a bad job doing a commentary track on Halloween and then going like, oh, that's embarrassing. I didn't do Halloween justice.
Yeah.
I knew I could do the Giant Claw justice because this movie is hilariously bad. The reputation for this movie is a hysterical, so bad it's good, like one of the worst movies of all time, corny, cheesy fun. And like I don't believe in so bad it's good. I think bad movies, I've seen a lot of bad movies, and the movies that are so bad because they're not interesting. Mm-hmm. So I think more than so bad it's good, you get so flawed they're fascinating.
Yeah.
Is I think a more accurate way to describe most movies people would call so bad they're good. And a lot of those movies are actually very well made. They're just doing a thing that the people don't understand. Like, for example, Showgirls, not so bad it's good. That movie is doing the exact thing it's trying to do. It's just operating on a level that people didn't accept it at.
Yeah.
Giant Claw is a movie that is so flawed, it's fascinating. And there is one central element of it. First of all, it's a bad movie. It's directed by Fred F. Sears. It has no energy. We talked about Columbia Pictures and like how they put a lot of money into 20 Million Miles to Earth. This is the flip side of that. Mm-hmm. In fact, this was a movie that they wanted Ray Harryhausen to do the special effects for, and he saw the script and he's like, nah, no interest. So then Sam Katzman assured Fred F. Sears like, oh yeah, don't worry, we got like the best there is, and like you're gonna see there's this amazing special effects team in Mexico that what they're doing is really gonna blow your mind. Before we talk about what the special effects team in Mexico did, we will talk about the way the movie is bad in that the camera has no energy. There's no cinematic look to it. All of the scenes are just two people talking, usually in a master shot, sometimes in a two shot, but it's just like no energy. The dialogue is just like a ton of science jargon that makes no sense. There's a weird like Coleman Francis vibe to the beginning where there's just so much narration and so much stock footage, and the narration done by Fred F. Sears himself. He used to always insert his own voice into his movies, so if you ever hear like a weird Brooklyn accent, that's because that's what Fred Sears sounded like. He talks over scenes where characters are talking, so rather than getting the scene as it was shot, we get a summary of the scene as we watch the scene. Like it's inept in all of the ways that like a bad movie that is boring is inept. But it's
a little like watching a bad movie with a bad commentary track where the filmmaker is just narrating what's happening on the screen.
Yes, the bad William Friedkin commentary tracks where he's just telling you what happens in the French Connection as you watch the French Connection.
Exactly.
It is kind of like that. But there's a single element that turns all of these other things into grand comedy, which is the special effects, the monster in the center. We've talked about stop motion. We talked about they built a goddamn 200-foot mantis.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about guys in suits. We've talked about weird machines in Kronos, puppets.
Hand animation in Kronos.
Hand animation. Yep. The Giant Claw is a marionette. Mm-hmm. It is a very silly looking bird. It is from outer space, but it just looks like a cartoon buzzard. It looks like something that would be like popping its head into Soupy Sales' door. Like it looks like it's part of a children's show. It has like angry eyebrows. Like the way it's so not like it's so disinterested in being a realistic monster, and it is just a live action cartoon marionette. They keep comparing it to the size of a battleship, which is very funny. It just becomes this like running joke where every time they say battleship, take a drink and you'll be drunk by the end of this 76-minute movie. So a fun fact I learned while doing the commentary track for the Giant Claw, they say the word battleship in the Giant Claw more than they say the word battleship in the movie Battleship.
Of course. Yeah, there you go.
I looked up the screenplay for Battleship and they say it half as much.
And you did a search.
I did. The hilarious thing is the actors did not know what they would be acting against. They were assured it was going to be great and sensational. There is a story that Jeff Morrow, the lead of this, also the lead of Kronos, a much better movie, obviously, he talks about, he was, I think he lived somewhere in Northern California, and he was well known in his small town that he lived in as like, oh yeah, he's a movie star, but he just, he's just another guy too. And he went to the local movie theater, and everyone showed up to support Jeff Morrow to see the new Jeff Morrow movie, the sci-fi movie. At this point, maybe they've already seen Kronos, and they're like, oh man, our boy's really doing it. That Kronos, that was something. And then they see the giant claw. And as soon as the buzzard shows up, and I need to say, this fucking bird makes the same sound effect the entire movie, and it's just like it's just doing the same identical scream the entire movie. It's just people talking, and then all of a sudden they're interrupted by. He started to like sink down in his seat because everyone could not stop laughing, and it's that scene in I think where they watch Bride of the Monster in Ed Wood, where they have to like flee because the theater is turning on them. He had to run out of the theater, and I don't know. It's very silly. It's very fun. It's all because this one central element is just so bad, and so there's like 3 special effects artists who were all credited with this puppet. None of them had anything to do with this puppet. That was because Sam Katzman broke guild laws and went down to Mexico and got people to do special effects that had no business being involved in union-driven motion pictures. So he had to lie about who even worked on the special effects. It's a fun movie. It's one I've seen like 14 times because I did that commentary track on it, and just because I have a fondness for it. I think it is like the movie that got me interested in watching, because obviously I'd seen King Kong, obviously I'd seen Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and Godzilla and stuff, but this is the one where I realized the joy of the lesser monster movies of the era, and I became into this. This in some weird, bizarre way was my entryway into my love of 1950s American sci-fi.
And I'll say that the what's weird that it's called the giant claw, first of all, and not like the giant bird or something. But I will say that part of what makes that reveal of the bird so funny is that it starts off pretty good. When you see the claws coming out of the sky, it's somewhat frightening in its scale. And then in the next shot, you see the ridiculous face. That it's like you couldn't have timed it better for comedy. That you're like shocked, like the audience is like, okay, I see where this is going, and then cut away to just the worst face you've ever seen, and it just comes out of nowhere, and it feels planned. It feels planned. Well, I should also say, I wonder if the idea was that they were trying to do a Rodan. That was the only thing I could think of that it was like a flying monster of this kind, but I don't know if Rodan had even showed in America yet. But the funny thing is that you said it was from outer space. Isn't it technically from an antimatter universe?
This is like Attack of the Crab Monsters. This is a movie where the science behind it's way too high concept.
Way too high concept. It is an antimatter universe, and that's another Marvel comic thing. Is that the antimatter universe is a big deal in comics of that era. But not only is it from an antimatter universe, which makes no sense. How did it break through to ours? And why does it just look like a bird? But it has a built-in force field. Which is another just weird thing that I feel like screenwriters are just like getting drunk one night and adding things to their giant bird. Like, it's a giant bird. Well, how big is it? It's as big as a battleship. Where's it come from?
Why don't they just shoot a missile at it? Because it has a force field.
It has a force field. Where's it from? Outer space? Well, that's boring. The antimatter universe. I was reading about that somewhere the other day. It's very, very weird stuff.
So I have an entire podcast where I talked about the giant claw. I do not need to. I mean, if you want to go check out episode 1 of Tracks of the Damned, and we can have a good time watching the movie together, you could do that. But I think this is one of those movies that, like, there is no power of the metaphor. There is no allegory happening here. There's the tropes that it stole from Beast from 20,000 Fathoms in terms of the dynamic between Maricorday and Jeff Morrow.
Yeah, we'll talk about Maricorday more when we talk about the Black Scorpion, because she's actually
yes. Both her and Jeff Morrow had really great Giant Monster 1957 entries, and then they came together and they made the Giant Claw.
Poor people. My Letterboxd review is worth it for the scene where dumb teenagers ignore curfew, drive by the heroes while calling them daddy-o a bunch.
Yes, there are some beatniks who get killed by a giant bird.
Relax, daddy-o. And so I was like, is this the first, like, I forgot, is the Friday the 13th character that warns people off of the death curse? Is that, like, the first case where, like, teenagers are ignoring adults and it gets them killed? Probably not, but...
That to me is less an example of that than the French-Canadian man who talks about, he has a specific folklore mythology that he is tying the giant claw to.
It's the Thunderbird, basically. Yeah, that was actually the one thing that kind of held me on the first time watching this, is that I love Larry Cohen's Q the Winged Serpent. And I feel like on some level Cohen was spoofing this, because he's spoofing a million things, or satirizing a million things. But there's a little things like the giant claw. They briefly considered that it is a mythological creature. I guess it's not a Thunderbird. It's something like that. It's a French thing, not a native.
There is a specific word, and when I searched the origin of this word, I found that it had no folklore origins. And I was like, okay, so where did this originate? And where it originated was a New Yorker short story from like 3 or 4 years before the movie came out, about like a grandpa telling his kids about seeing a monster once. That monster, they stole the name and the premise of that monster for that one scene where the French Canadian is like, oh, I know what it is. And it's some word I can't recall at this moment. But it was stolen from a weird, like, literary New Yorker short story.
So it wasn't even stolen from, like Q the Winged Serpent. It's implied that it's a Quetzalcoatl of some kind.
Exactly.
Which, you know, is part of what makes that movie so interesting, is that there's all this implication of this actually is a god, not just a monster. But I guess that was something that got me through some of the boringer parts, is finding comparisons to Q the Winged Serpent. All right, so then... we're going to cover one more in this recording. The Monster That Changed the World, which is by... The Monster That Challenged the World by Arnold Laven, or Laven. We'll say Laven. This one is not quite awful enough to be that sort of enjoyably awful, but it's also not quite good. It's kind of... There was stuff I liked about it. The plot, this one is giant mollusks are released from the earth by an earthquake and start killing people. Good job. Whoever put that on Letterboxd. And I thought that these were supposed to be bugs. I thought that they were centipedes, but they eventually start calling them mollusks. And there is, like, think a couple shots where they have shells. Mm-hmm. So they're just mollusks that are coming way out of their shells out into to attack people, and so they look kind of like centipedes. And I don't know if this one. It was radiation has something to do with them, but they're supposed to be naturally occurring animals, I believe. They've just been released by the earthquake, but that the radiation had something to do with the earthquake or something.
This was written by a woman, which I think is the only movie that's true of for our whole list.
At least credited. Yeah, I think it's
true. Good point. And she based it off of a Life magazine article about, like, these mollusk eggs that were prehistoric, that were found in some state. They were able to be brought back to life and hatched. And so that was the genesis of this story.
And this one is an interesting setting. It's the Salton Sea in California, where there is actually an Air Force base there. And from what I can tell, they actually did do parachute tests there. So the movie adds them doing atomic tests, which causes problems. But it seems like the stock footage they used might have honestly been from the actual place that it's supposed to take place. I have no idea if it was. It probably wasn't, but it could have been. And there's some cool parachuting stuff. I liked the stock. This is another case of me liking the stock footage, enjoying the stock footage.
This is another one of those movies like the Deadly Mantis where there's a problem of momentum, where it's just sort of like the monster attacks, and then people go, oh, that's kind of, boy, there's this monster here. And then the monster attacks someone else, And then people just sort of being like, well, it looks like this monster that attacked that first person has attacked a second. And then the monster attacks and it's like, wow, we really should do something about these monsters. I just wish we knew what was going on with these monsters. And then there's a you know what I mean? It's just like, it never really starts. There never feels to be much forward momentum. There's not a lot of like, this happens and then therefore this happens.
Yeah.
I found the male lead to be really unpleasant. He's kind of just this like stick in the mud, like old, I forget the name of the actor, but it's just like the idea of him as a romantic lead is so bizarre to me.
Tim Holt.
Tim Holt.
Yeah. His only charm is that he is so unbelievable as a romantic lead. I think is the one that there's any sort of possibility of him being a romantic lead is so unbelievable that there's just like a little hint of charm to like, okay, I guess, but go for it, buddy, kind of action going on.
It's kind of like what's his name in Halloween 3?
Yeah.
Why are we blanking on this? Everyone's going to be mad at us. Tom.
Not Scarrett. Not Scarrett.
Tom Atkins.
Atkins, yeah.
I had to Google it.
Tom
That's
Atkins,
embarrassing.
if he was like even more like he's like a pathetic version of Tom Atkins.
Tom Atkins is at least a doctor.
Yeah.
I think in this movie, even other cops kind of shit talk him for being boring.
Yeah. He's in the Magnificent Ambersons, the Orson Welles Magnificent Ambersons. As a character that fits him a little better. He's also in The Treasure of Sierra Madre. I cannot remember who he plays in that one.
He of the three men who go to get the treasure, there's Humphrey Bogart, there's Walter Houston, and then there's Tim Holt. And so it's really like just like kid. You know who Walter Houston and Humphrey Bogart are, so Tim Holt is the other one.
He's like the kid, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does have a sort of like when see, now I'm forgetting. Now I'm really losing names. The child actor who became a really fuddy-dud. Shit.
Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
No, but way older than that. The one who there's a joke that he owned a chicken restaurant.
Oh, Mickey Rooney?
Yes, Mickey Rooney.
There's a little bit of a Mickey Rooney thing.
There's a little bit of a Mickey Rooney as an adult trying to play an adult, but you still remember him as Mickey Rooney thing going on with this actor.
At any rate, the reason we're talking about him like that is because there is a romantic subplot where there is like the secretary of a scientist who's investigating this monster, and him have this sort of romantic thing where he's like, "Look, I don't mind that you're, a formerly married woman. You have a child. That's not a problem for me." So maybe like there's supposed to be something endearing about these like two unlikely romantic leads coming together, but I was not on board for Tim Holt.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too. I actually looked up their age difference between Tim Holt and Audrey Dalton, and it was only 15 years, but it might as well be 35.
It looks like he is like, I remember when I was your dad's teacher.
Yeah. And there's even a line where she says, "You're much too serious," and I remember he is. Why is this happening?
He's serious because he remembers World War I.
Yeah.
So there's that subplot that takes up a lot of the movie. There's like a whole scene where they're just like having a dinner date in Mexico.
Yeah.
Very weird. And then there is the monster. And to this movie's credit, I'm not a big fan of the monster that challenged the world, but the monster itself is really creepy looking.
Yeah.
Its face looks like a human skull. Like it's got really big eye sockets and its eyes don't have any pupils or anything. So it kind of looks like the visage of like a human skull on top of a giant worm in a way that's kind of like creepy and gross. And this is one of the movies. Obviously, the Deadly Mantis is super, super huge monster they made. This is another movie where the monster itself was a life-size model they made. They made a 12-foot like segmented worm monster that had to be, puppeted by like three different crew members. And so they are able to like shoot it with actors in the same shot and it like popping up while two people are in a boat, or like one of them hatches from an egg while she's stuck in the lab. So it's like attacking her in a lab. And like, again, because it's not optically printed, because it's not stop motion, because it's actually there, they're able to do some scares that they can't get away with in a lot of these other movies.
That scene actually reminds me of the scene in Aliens where Ripley and Newt are locked in the room with the face hugger.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. There's more Jaws in this movie. There is a scene where a girl is pulled underwater, and it's the same kind of vibe as the opening of Jaws. It's almost like the opening of Jaws is like, here's what that scene would look like if it was scary, but we get the idea.
Yeah. It has that maybe more like it has that Jaws 2 thing where it's kind of a slasher movie.
Yeah.
Where it's just there are just like a dozen people who get eaten by the monster that challenged the world. And then there's like kids who are like ignoring curfew. I mean, there's literally a line. There's basically a moment where someone's like, "Are you going to close the beaches?"
Yeah.
In this
don't
movie,
the kids go into a different, like a lagoon, because they're allowed to play there, and the monster ends up there? Isn't that happen in this movie? Or
I think that there's like sneaking out past curfew or whatever, and then they are punished for their sexual dalliance by a giant segmented worm digesting them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot. And then the other thing that reminded me of Aliens is there's a scene where they go to find an egg sac, and we're mostly told what's happening because they probably didn't want to have to shoot it, but we're told what's happening over the radio, and it kind of reminded me of a less dynamic version of the scene in Aliens where we experience a lot of the rescue from Ripley watching what's happening on the screens. It kind of reminded me of that. I don't know. I could see Jim Cameron having seen this movie and say, "Oh, those are good ideas that I can do better." And there's also there's a sort of intensity to the kills because it sort of deflates its victims, and it's pretty gross.
Before we see the worm itself, we see the aftermath of some of the victims, and it's notable that multiple victims die screaming.
Yeah,
they like die of fright, and they've been like that because it's all in the Salton Sea and stuff. There's something about them being dehydrated, or something about the salt of their body being sucked out, or something like that.
Yeah.
So before we get the first look at the monster, there is some gruesome aftermath stuff going on where like mannequin heads with fucked up faces are like popping up in the water, which again, that's a Jaws thing. That's when they find Ben Gardner's boat.
Yeah.
Basically what we're saying is that Steven Spielberg is a ripoff artist and a hack.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
Jaws wishes it could be the monster that challenged the world.
I actually never read the novel Jaws, so I don't know how much is actually. Isn't it way different though?
Yeah, it's way different.
Yeah, okay.
The thing about the novel Jaws is they come back every night, so they go out like 4 times looking for the shark.
Yeah, that's not very cinematic.
No. I read that book like in the past couple years or whatever. That book's not very good.
Yeah, I've always heard it's a kid like the most famous. That and Angel Heart are the two that always get mentioned. Terrible book, good movie.
Yeah, and I think Godfather is one of those.
Oh yeah, and Godfather's like on the verge at the very least.
Yeah. But at any rate, the most important thing about the monster that challenged the world was the ground it broke, not for inspiring Jaws or Aliens or any number of wonderful movies. It was because this is, and if anyone has proof to the contrary, please let me know. This is, to my knowledge, the first ever movie that has a scene where a coroner is eating a sandwich.
I have that note here, Patrick. I'm so happy you brought that up. I have that exact note. I say, is this the first time a mortician ate a sandwich over a body and grossed out somebody?
They even have the gag where he offers it, and it's like their stomach is turned because they saw the body and what happened to it after the monster got a hold of it. But the coroner's like, well, it's just Tuesday to me, man.
So I actually have Laven did make some good westerns in noir, and I think you get a little of that sort of western noir kind of the way people talk to each other in this. And but there's one scene that really got me where the lieutenant talks to a little girl who is the daughter of the character who's going to be his love interest. And so what this really is this is a scene that's setting up that he could be a father figure, but she has a ladybug. And they spend a lot of time talking about the ladybug, and then he loses the ladybug, and he has to refine the ladybug for her, and he promises her he'll find it. And I feel like in any post-70s horror movie, that would be Chekhov's ladybug. That ladybug would either come back as a mutate, and it would be sad because it was their favorite ladybug and it became a monster, or it would be a hero kaiju.
Right.
It would be one or the other.
Or it's like there is one object in that lab that will save them from the monster,
And the ladybug lands on it?
The ladybug lands on it. And they're like, oh, of course, the reverse polarity, whatever.
Yeah. Chekhov's ladybug doesn't happen. And then a thing that I started to notice at this point is that there's a lot of From Here to Eternity references in these movies where people are making out on a beach as the tide hits them. And I hesitate to call this one a gratuitous swimsuit sequence because the whole film is centered around the sea and swimming. But it is definitely a gratuitous From Here to Eternity reference is what I got out of it.
From Here to Eternity, a movie that also takes place in the American military, but like very specifically, it's all about the neurosis of the people inside the American military.
Yeah.
And it's like, boy, I wish a lot of these movies could have had some more From Here to Eternity neurosis.
Yeah.
Like, what if we just had this like failing marriage in the center of the Deadly Mantis? That would be so much more interesting.
Yeah. This one is our second little boy obsessed with a kind of hat.
Oh, yeah.
He's obsessed with, instead of a cowboy hat, it's a sailor's cap, which ends up being another clue. Yeah, it's an important clue that needs to be said. So another little boy finds a clue on a beach and it is hat related. And like we were saying, the main lead is not very good and the rest of the male cast is pretty interchangeable. But there is a perpetually concerned looking doctor played by Hans Conried. I'm going to say Conried. He was another popular TV actor, and so I kind of thought I recognized him from that. He just has a little more levity, and he's a little weird and just a little off. And I looked him up, and he is our second famous voice actor after the... He is the he did a bunch of Snidely Whiplash on Dudley Do-Right and Wally the Walrus on the Woody Woodpecker Show, but he is most famous for playing the gayest of all Disney villains, Captain Hook.
Hell yeah! Happy Pride, everybody!
Yeah, he even looks a little like Hook if you stop the movie and drew like a little mustache on him. He looks a little like him. He plays similar characters in The Shaggy DA and The Cat from Outer Space. And he was the original Horton in Horton Hears a Who, the short version of that. So I have him as being a memorable actor, and then I have this weird little pervert guy who's their map collector that they have to visit. He's played by Milton Parsons. And just when the movie's like really starting to get boring, that's weird little pervert brings all this freak energy to it. And he shows up again later and is even weirder in the second scene. And he is so needed at that point in the movie, but he's like keeps track of the lore of the town basically, and he's just waiting.
Oh, that's right.
He's waiting for people to die and for a certain proposition to go through so he can collect more stuff, not because he's going to resell it, but because he needs to know the lore of the town. He's a really interesting, unique character that I really enjoyed. And then the secondary female lead, Marjorie Stapp's character. There's one genuinely heartbreaking scene where she has to be told her husband has died at sea. And it's a really well-staged scene where she comes up and it's like, hey, where's my husband? And she can see how uncomfortable everybody is. So she tries to crack a joke to break the tension, not realizing that they're uncomfortable because they're going to have to tell her that her husband's dead. And I really thought that was almost too well done of a scene for the rest of the movie. I was taken aback by how much that scene affected me. It might be a case of the thing like what happened when we watched all the shot on video horror movies where I stopped being able to know what a good movie was for a couple of weeks. It might not be as good as I'm remembering, but it was a scene of genuine heartbreak that I actually felt something while watching. And then the only other note I have is that the little girl is played by Mimi Gibson. And she was not a huge actress, but she was a child actress, and she became a important advocate for child actors who actually testified before the California Legislative Panel on statutory protection for child actor earnings. And I just thought that was interesting because there's been a lot of discourse about treatment of child actors lately. So
yeah,
she's still alive too. She's still alive. So I don't know, not a great movie, but there's weird little perverts. There's one very well done scene. I like the monsters. I like the way the monsters kill people, and I liked the connections that I made to Aliens and Jaws.
It feels like a real movie.
Yeah.
it feels like when they are doing the romantic subplot, which I didn't care for, they are doing it because they care about the characters and want to see them get together. It feels like when they are showing the monster, they are like they built a real monster and they cared about the design of it.
Yeah.
You know, there's like you said, like the guy who knows the town lore and everything. There's like some interesting supporting characters, coloring in the margins and stuff like that, in a way that is like, not all these movies were made by people who gave a shit, but this one feels like it was made by people who gave a shit. The other thing is, I'm like looking right now on the Wikipedia article for movies released by United Artists. This was produced by Gramercy Pictures, but it was distributed by United Artists, and there's a big United Artists logo right at the beginning. And I always associate United Artists with like sort of weird, don't quite fit into Hollywood projects. I associate them because they were founded at the beginning of Hollywood as sort of like a way of, you know, movie stars and directors and stuff of having more creative control to take away from the studios, basically. And like that's kind of the energy I've always associated with them. So I was like, did they do many like schlocky like sci-fi movies in the 50s? And it turned out they did. They did all sorts of movies. So I thought that was an interesting note, and now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, they did The Magnetic Monster or whatever. Like, no, this is not. Just because they released The Sweet Smell of Success doesn't mean they didn't also release The Vampire.
Yeah, which what's her name also wrote, I believe.
Oh, that's right. That's another Pat Field, because that's a Gramercy Pictures release. But
Return of Dracula and The Vampire. She wrote all those.
My only other note here is that this monster does not challenge the world. It kind of just eats 9 people.
Yeah, it challenges the small dying community of this around the Salton Sea.
The like very specifically, it is sort of people who don't believe what's going on, and then people who are trying to figure out what's going on and convince the others that that's going on, which again is the whole Jaws parallel there. But like as soon as the military shows up, it just takes like 5 guys with machine guns to blow it away, and they're just like, all right, well, the world wins, I guess. World 1, Monster 0.
Yeah. It's also more than one monster, technically, I guess, is another problem with that title.
Yeah, I always thought "Challenge the World" is like a weird title, and I always thought that was very funny.
Yeah,
it's like challenge them to
like
what?
He went to the UN and told all the countries of the world to look inward and think about what they've done.
Or maybe it was just like a mollusk competing in a hot dog eating contest.
Yeah, that's a disadvantage because he's got a really long stomach, I assume.
I don't know enough about hot dog eating, apparently.
Well, I'm just picturing hot dogs just going and continuing. Like he probably has a long esophagus too. You know, he can just fill it up. I don't know how mollusks work. These aren't even real mollusks. They have very little in common with actual mollusks. They're basically they're centipedes with shells, is what we'll say. Anyway, and it's, you know, we had the perfect segue there because you said it was the beginning of the end for sci-fi horror.
Ah, very good.
Ironically, that's the name of our next movie, The Beginning of the End. This is directed by Bert I. Gordon. This is our first Bert I. Gordon thing. We actually discussed him very briefly in a pretty recent podcast where Ariani and I discussed killer animal movies, because we talked about The Food of the Gods Part 2, which he did not direct, but we had to talk about The Food of the Gods Part 1. This is the first of 3 Bert I. Gordon movies we're going to be covering. And he was sort of famous for just having movies with giant monsters, or usually giant animals that were just photographed to look big, or people. He didn't do a lot of I can't think of any stop motion or animation or guys in rubber suit kind of action. It's usually trick photography.
No, I think by the time you get to the
70s.
Yeah, I think by the time you get to the 70s, what you have is like, and then we go in for the close up, and that's where you see just like the paws of the giant rat or whatever as it's like reaching through a door or something. But certainly this era, it was all pure photographic trickery.
And the fun is his name is Bert I. Gordon, so his initials are Big. So he's Mr. Big. That's his nickname, which, you know, is fun. Unfortunately, I could see the charm in Mr. Big movies. Don't know if I've liked any of them, but this one might honestly be my favorite of the ones we've watched, just because of how borderline inept it is.
This one might be the most charmingly inept. They are all inept. The thing about his movies is that it's all photographic trickery. So it's all just taking a spider and then shooting it against a green screen, and then like just using opticals to put the spider in the same scene as the full-size actors. But it's very rudimentary, very rough-looking special effects. They never match cleanly. There's often like a little bit of blurring, or like the lighting never matches in any of these movies, or they're slightly transparent in some way, because it's actually like what he has done is taken footage of these animals and projected it on a screen. It just has actors acting in front of a movie projection. And the way the camera is picking up this movie screen, it's very clear that it's not there. So like part of that is very fun. The other thing about him is that he made very trashy movies, and he was not afraid to just be really dumb. There's very little like moral hand wringing in any of the Bert I. Gordon movies. Personally, I think like post 50s is more my Bert I. Gordon, like Land of the Giants or something, where he was making these movies because there was a market for them, and he was a schlocky independent filmmaker who was trying to make a buck any way he could. But eventually the culture sort of caught up around him, and camp became a thing, and he was able to lean into it and make it more marketable. And then so when you get to like Land of the Giants or something, or stuff like that, that's when you start to see movies that feel more holistically working. Or my favorite is Empire of the Ants.
I was just gonna mention Empire of the Ants, which is like a soap opera that happens to have giant ants. It's that one. I feel like his 70s movies have a bit more of a soap opera feel to them.
And there's something apocalyptic about his 70s movies, that these movies are more straight down the middle, just like, well, them was successful. What's another insect? Oh, grasshopper. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, the monster in this movie they keep calling them locusts, same difference, grasshoppers. They're a bunch of grasshoppers. And its plot, the note I made for myself is that the beginning of the end's plot is so generic that it kind of feels like the movie that you'd have to make to have playing in the background of a different movie, because you wanted to establish that your movie was taking place in the 50s, but you didn't want to pay a licensor for an existing property.
Yes, it's the problem. The problem with this is the one like glaring example of this being in a movie was done by Joe Dante, who was too good. So Mant from the movie Matinee has way more personality than Beginning of the End. But Beginning of the End definitely feels like the fake giant monster movie that you would see a scene of in an episode of The Simpsons or something.
Right.
It's very generic. The pacing is so weird.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we're going to be talking about another Bert I. Gordon movie later that has the opposite problem of the pacing. But like Beginning of the End, it opens with a couple necking in a car, teenagers, they get at by a giant monster. Very good. That's
I think that's our first example of this, actually. I can't remember.
I feel, didn't we have one of those in? Well, no, we had the hooligans in the car in The Giant Claw, and I thought maybe we had one of those in The Monster That Challenged the World.
You might be right.
But at any rate, this is the era of the juvenile delinquents, and two of them get eaten by grasshoppers. The thing, again, about a monster movie where all the special effects are photographic is that the actors in no way, shape, or form are ever sharing the stage with these monsters, so they can't interact ever. And so you can get a lot of fun, campy, silly effects, and there's a lot of great stock footage of flamethrower tanks and, people firing bazookas and stuff like that. But ultimately, there's like a very low ceiling on how exciting anything can be, because nothing is ever reacting to each other. He never cuts to a close-up of a grasshopper mandible grabbing someone, or a close-up of legs breaking through a window or something, because that would require building puppets, and he didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I actually have this in my notes too. It feels like if you wanted to, This can be done right. The movie Failsafe, which was kind of remade as Dr. Strangelove, that movie is almost all people in bunkers and boardrooms talking about the horrible apocalypse that will happen if they don't get their shit together. So there is a way that good filmmakers, I think that was Sidney Lumet or something, made that movie.
Yeah, that was Sidney Lumet who did Failsafe.
Yeah. So you get a really great filmmaker. It's almost like a play. Like it's really intense, but the stakes are super high in this one. They are going
incredibly high.
They're going to drop an A-bomb on Chicago.
Before they know that there are giant grasshoppers, they know that an entire town of 150 people has been destroyed and all of the people are missing.
Yeah.
So it's like the body count is extraordinary in this movie.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is like the pace of it, as far as like very first scene, 2 teenagers get eaten, that's very good. It's not necessarily a good scene because you don't see anything happen. You just see them look up at the camera and scream, and then it cuts to the next moment or whatever. But it doesn't tease you too long before revealing what happens. And there's a lot of footage of army men fighting grasshoppers, by the time you get to the 30-minute mark. But then there's just sort of a long stretch of this movie, like 20 minutes or so, where it seems like all of the main characters are just in a single building and the grasshoppers are in Chicago and there's no forward momentum at all. And it's like, it feels like they got to the third act way too quickly. Mm-hmm. And there's nowhere for it to escalate because all you have is the exact same footage of grasshoppers walking to the left or walking to the right. or in, the most famous special effect in this movie is he literally just took printed out photographs of Chicago buildings and photographed grasshoppers walking on these photographs. And that was like your shot of giant grasshoppers scaling buildings.
It's so funny because it works for like a split second. You think it's a model or something. And then one of the grasshoppers will step off into the sky and not fall off the building or something.
This movie made me think about, like, in a broad sense, the way the human mind personifies things or adds personality and characteristics to things or creates stories or whatever. Because I was watching this, and grasshoppers are not cute animals. They're not cute insects. They're not endearing looking at all.
No.
But because the effects in this movie are so silly, every time it would cut to like little grasshoppers crossing a bridge that I recognize from the downtown Chicago, I would just like, it was so endearing. I thought they were so cute. And I'm like, oh, they're just little guys, because I'm not thinking about them as giant grasshoppers. I'm thinking about them as dumb little insects who are like in some dude's garage as he makes his stupid movie.
Just looking for the way out.
And it's like, it made me think about like the human mind's ability to empathize with and project meaning onto the most like soulless, like ugly things possible, like grasshoppers.
I realized I was going to read we've been reading the descriptions on Letterboxd. I'll just quickly do this. An attractive reporter investigates the mysterious destruction of an Illinois town, which we just talked about, stumbles upon a secret government laboratory conducting radiation experiments on vegetables. So this is another one where it is radiation's fault and humanity's fault. I'm pretty sure that the giant vegetables thing originates with Food of the Gods, the story.
Yes.
The Food of the Gods and How It Came to Earth by H.G. Wells. And it's kind of funny that to think that Bert I. Gordon never got that story out of his system. And it's just like part of this movie and maybe his most famous movie is Food of the Gods. And I had it originally. There's another one that uses it too, and now I can't. I don't think that's why the ants are big in Kingdom of the Ants, but the idea of giant food that's irradiated is just a very common theme for him. But I believe, it starts with the Wells story.
The ants in Empire of the Ants, I think, are like super intelligent because they put humans in ant farms.
That's right.
So there's some other weird intelligence going on in Empire of the Ants. I think Empire of the Ants is also based off of that might be like an Edgar Rice Burroughs story or something like that.
Right.
Bert I. Gordon as a hack filmmaker is in fact the very next movie we're going to be talking about is also Bert I. Gordon, also has a very clear inspiration that he uses as a scaffolding to sort of drape his story over. So beginning of the end is very much just like Food of the Gods plus them.
Yeah. We just kind of assume that any killer insect movie is trying to take the fact that them is actually very well done and popular and just do their own version of it.
Right. Either them or Beast from 20,000 Fathoms are like the two Warner Brothers movies that everyone is everyone else is trying to chase. Unless you get something really weird like Kronos or something.
Yeah. Kronos and one of the last ones we're going to cover is particularly strange monsters. But yeah,
as a resident of Chicago, I do like that so much of this takes place in downtown Chicago, and there's just
I was just going to ask, do you even have grasshoppers in Chicago? I know these are mutants, but can you remember in the city ever seeing any sort of horde of locusts?
Never.
No.
We don't. We have rabbits all over.
Squirrels.
Night of the Lepus seems more likely to happen in Chicago.
But that was shot in my hometown of Tucson, Arizona.
Very good.
Where we do have lots of rabbits. We also have jackrabbits, which are something different and way scarier. But anyway, yeah.
But the thing is, you get all the fucking giant monster movies out in Arizona, out in New Mexico, in those
or
desert,
Mexico itself, the Sonoran Desert.
Mexico itself.
Yeah.
The idea of it being Chicago, sweet home Chicago, as James Belushi would sing.
The Midwest in general, you don't see.
Very rare.
Yeah, it's usually a coast or a desert.
And I do think Bert I. Gordon had ties to Chicago, but
he's from Kenosha, so basically.
Got it. So he was from the Midwest because he made this movie in California. A fun production story that I read about this movie is that he imported 200 grasshoppers from Texas, but California state law says that you can't import insects into this cross state lines unless they're all male, and it has to be confirmed by a California official. So there was he got the grasshoppers, but then there was a delay for the California official to come out, in which Bert I. Gordon just had these cages of grasshoppers in his garage that he did nothing with. And of course they started starving, so they started cannibalizing each other. So by the time that he got the okay to use these grasshoppers, he only had like 20 left. So I will say, the monsters that you see in this movie are real killers. These are the fittest, strongest, most ruthless grasshoppers that existed in that group. So I'm sure he had 200. Well, number one, I'm sure he had 200 because I'm sure they were cheap as dirt.
Yeah.
And it's like, do I order 40 or do I order 400?
Yeah.
Basically the same thing. So why don't I just get more just in case? But also, you get the idea of beginning of the end of, if there's an idea of a biblical sense to this movie, a plague of locusts, was there at some point going to be scenes where it's just like hundreds of these things crawling all over, the photographs of buildings or whatever?
Yeah.
Possibly, but there is no such shot in this movie because he only had 20. So most of the time you only see like 2 or 3 grasshoppers walking around at a time. And it doesn't quite have that swarm effect that maybe he wanted to go for at some point.
Yeah, I think that Gordon has the right idea with them having a situation where they have to take care of the problem or else atom bomb is going to be dropped on Chicago. And he gets across the point that this is an apocalyptic situation and that the way to deal with it is a really horrible thing that no one wants to do. He just doesn't have the skill to execute. I don't know if he ever did. He definitely didn't during his first feature film. I think this is his first feature film.
This is his third feature film.
Okay.
His first was King Dinosaur.
Oh, okay.
Which
I've never
is
seen
really rough. That movie, holy cow! Beginning of the end looks like Jurassic Park compared to King Dinosaur. According to his wife, the Cyclops and Beginning of the End were made back to back, and Cyclops was actually made first, even though it was released later.
Okay.
And I do think actually you can see him teaching himself how to make a movie, because by the time you get to The Amazing Colossal Man, which we will be talking about later, that one actually has camera movement and expressive lighting and cinematic ideas that when you watch something like King Dinosaur or Beginning of the End, it's just not present.
To some of the ongoing things at this recording, if you're listening to this is probably going to be on part 2, but it might be on part 3. So I'm just going to warn people right now. There's going to be moments when we are calling back to stuff that you just heard us call back to, and I apologize for that, but that's just the way it's going to go. But one of the things we've been trying to make sure we cover is stock footage use, from my end, and this one has a lot of stock footage in it, and it's very clearly stock footage, and it's not particularly interesting stock footage like we saw in
in
monster
fact, not
that challenged
just
the
stock
world.
footage, but stock photos. There's a lot of and not just the photos of Chicago that insects climb over. Like, there's a lot of just like a photograph is projected behind people as they walk around, and it's very clearly just a photograph. It's again, the charm of this movie is that it like barely holds together.
Yeah.
Well, it barely feels like a thing that people would tolerate if they went to see it in theaters in 1957.
The cast does a pretty admirable job, I would say. This is another case where the cast is mostly remembered for television, and it includes Peter Graves of Airplane and Mission Impossible fame. And I found out when trying to look into the cast that he was probably cast specifically because his brother James Graves was in them. And I could totally see Bert I. Gordon going, well, we can't afford that guy, but maybe we can afford his brother. But then the female lead is the Southern California Restaurant Association's Miss Cheesecake 1949.
Hell yeah.
And her name...
Talk about Miss Cheesecake, hubba hubba.
That's where the term cheesecake comes from. I didn't know that until I researched this.
Really?
Yeah. Peggy Castle is her name. No relation to William Castle. But the funny thing is she plays another investigative photojournalist. And she is supposed to be relatively famous, unlike Marge in the Deadly Mantis, who's kind of more of a hobbyist. She's not quite plucky Lois Lane level, but she's definitely one of the stronger female leads we have in all these movies. This is in particular because she is the lead and has an extensive backstory. She's not just her backstory. This is not a film that passes the Bitchell test, but she has an actual backstory. Most of these, the woman's backstory is that she works for the dude or is the dude's wife or sister in some cases. She actually has a backstory. Her backstory is actually so... there's so much to her backstory, and the way people react to her being famous makes it feel sometimes like this is part 3 or 4 of a serial about Audrey Ames, ace reporter. Like, there's just certain points where I feel like this is just another adventure that Audrey Ames is having, and that this is just... There's just something about it that where, like, she's the most important person. It's just that, I don't know. That's just what I got.
She is the protagonist. This has a female lead. Peter Graves gets most of the stuff to do later on once he's introduced, but she is sort of the person the story is initially happening to. It's interesting you compared it to a serial, because another interesting thing I find about this movie is that it is released during the last years of Republic Pictures, who did not make the movie, but they distributed the movie. And they were famous in the 30s and 40s as being one of the Poverty Row studios that, in addition to just cranking out 3 Westerns a month, produce some of the less lustrous films of like Bela Lugosi and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So if you're a fan of old, classic horror movies, Republic Pictures is one of those Poverty Row studios that produce some of those low-budget movies. And this is the era when they started transitioning into film. So Bert I. Gordon sort of getting in this Poverty Row distribution right at the end here. All 3 of his movies from 1957 all had 3 different distributors, which makes me think that he did not necessarily impress anyone he worked with. he just kind of kept the deals going.
I just looked it up because I was thinking the Batman serial was Republic, but that was a Columbia, so that was like a much more reputable serial. But I was wondering if there wasn't really a Superman serial. There was a Superman television series around this time. But the Supermans were the cartoons, those really great cartoons. I'm just trying to connect it to Lois Lane. It eventually, unfortunately, the actual connection to Lois Lane, there's a literal connection to Lois Lane in one of the movies that I watched that didn't have a giant monster in it, so we're not going to cover it. But the actress who played Lois Lane on the TV show plays a Lois Lane-like character in The Incredible Petrified World. And I was just like, and then so I spent the whole movie hoping a giant monster would show up so we could talk about it. But so I'm using this as an excuse. That had to watch that horrible, boring movie. That's my factoid from that. But I think that Castle's doing kind of a Katharine Hepburn more than a Rosalind Russell, His Girl Friday thing, that kind of thing. And I hate to harp on the failed romances in these movies. But there is this well-done bit in this one where the military captain asks her on a date and she flat out ignores him and changes the subject. Like, she just sort of, there's like a pause and then she starts talking about something else. That's about as close as we get to a rejection in any of these movies.
Yeah, as we continue to chart the path of female characters in these movies and the places they play, it is worth saying Beginning of the End has one of the pluckier, more interesting female leads.
And I would actually give it to the Cyclops, too, that we'll talk about in just a second. The only other notes I have is Hank Peterson from Petticoat Junction and Green Acres has a cameo in this. It's another TV actor. But that's all I got on this one, if you want to, because Cyclops is actually the next one. So
Yeah.
we can move right on to it. So yeah, like Patrick said, this one was actually probably shot first, but released after. And there's basically two kinds of movies that Bert I. Gordon makes for a while. He has some other ones, but he has movies about giant animals, and he has movies about giant men. And this is the first of his giant men trilogy.
But notably has giant animals in it.
It does. And also, it's not technically actually a prequel to the other two Giant Man movies, which are literally a sequel. One is a sequel to the other one. But it is the same man playing the Giant Men in all three of them. Oh, no, he's in two of the three of them. So the plot of this one is a 50-foot high, this thing says, 50-foot high man thing in the land of nature gone mad. I don't like man thing being in there. A test pilot is missing, and the search party is sent out to the jungles of Mexico. That's not true. They're not in the jungle. They're in the desert. However, while searching, they uncover a monster in the jungle who became this way due to a dose of radioactivity. So yeah, this is in Mexico. This is the third movie we've covered that takes place in Mexico, I believe. Maybe even the fourth. Since we're recording this kind of out of order, and this is a excruciatingly boring movie whenever Mr. Lon Chaney Jr. isn't on screen, basically.
Oh, I wouldn't give him that much credit.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty boring even when he's on screen.
This is a case of the behind the scenes stuff is that Lon Chaney Jr. was really drunk on set and hard to deal with, and you can tell that he is not faking any of his drunkenness as his character he's playing. It's actually kind of sad to see how miserable he is in this situation. In reality, not his character's miserable too, but he is clearly miserable and not enjoying himself.
So the issue with this movie is the Cyclops is what if the treasure of the Sierra Madre but uranium.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is it's a giant monster movie. The plot has nothing to do with the giant monsters. They're kind of just sort of parallel to each other.
Yeah.
So nothing about the central premise of this sort of valley of uranium causing all of these radioactive mutations on the local flora and fauna, and this one guy who crash landed there who now has only one eye. Like, none of that has anything to do with the interdynamics of the characters, which is Lon Chaney is greedy and he gets paranoid that they're going to try to cut him out of all this uranium, so he's going to cut them out first, and it's the treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah, he's just Humphrey Bogart in Treasures.
So a lot of this movie is excruciatingly boring because it's just time killing. It's just nothing seems to could be. It's two stories that aren't connected to each other. It's I have a note here. I just watched a guy try to buy a Sports Illustrated for 8 minutes because there's a scene early
true.
on,
Yes.
like super long scene where a guy's trying to buy an American sports magazine from like a Mexican newsstand, and it just goes on and on. And it's not amusing or funny. I think the idea is that it's comic relief, but it just is like, yeah, we're just killing time. And it's like, well, this is a movie about the Cyclops, right? When are we going to see Oh, we'll see the Cyclops, but also I have this footage of a hawk devouring a mouse, and I'm going to make those two giant. We're going to have some lizards fighting. There's going to be a tarantula. It's like, well, what does that have to do with anything? It's it's fine. It's all stuff. It's a series of stuff that happens.
There was part of me that liked that they actually had some boring scenes in Mexico, because all the other movies that take place in Mexico don't get a lot of. Well, that's not true, because then
we got one great exception coming later.
And I watched these in the order we're covering them, so yes, pretty soon they'll actually be a good Mexican movie. But I was at the time like, oh, good, they're actually in Mexico doing Mexican things. But it doesn't last, and they really just end up in a airplane and then just in the middle of nowhere doing nothing. It was another one that also reminded me that the Valley of Guanji is a better movie than what I'm watching right now, which it came up a couple times because Valley and Guanji and 20 Million Miles of Earth have so much in common. But this one is obviously not as good as 20 Million Miles to Earth. I also wanted to make a note that I feel like I can't talk shit about Italian cannibal movies and the way that they would pit, and Mondo movies, pitting animals against each other just for our viewing enjoyment. It's really just as bad here. There's just two random like monitor lizards that would probably never meet in reality, that they just sick against each other and they kill like one of them. They fuck each other up. So it sucks. And if you're like an animal lover, it does kind of ruin this otherwise goofy beer and pizza kind of movie watching experience where suddenly, like, I guess a hawk killing a rat doesn't bother me because the hawk's eating the rat, and that might have happened anyway. But sticking two poor lizards against each other that don't have any reason to fight, it always makes me sad.
How do you feel about all of the grasshoppers drowning at the end of
honestly
end?
It bothers me a little bit, even though they're just grasshoppers, and I actually don't like grasshoppers, but it does bother me a little bit. It's a little bit of a bummer, but not as much as the lizards. The poor lizards. I like lizards. I grew up with a lot of lizards around, and they were always good because they ate the black widows. So maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just a lizard.
No,
lover.
I don't like it. It's two things. One is it is just animal suffering on screen, where you're no longer watching a fun sci-fi movie about an irradiated valley. You're watching two animals harm each other. And then the other thing is, it's like, the reason you did this is because you suck. And if you didn't suck, you would have been able to come up with puppets or stop motion. Yeah. Or like, if you did your fucking job correctly, you could tell a story, but you can't tell a story. So instead, you're just making animals fight. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing about the cannibal movies, too. It's like, you don't need these animals to be killed on screen, but like, you suck, so you do.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to kill an animal than to make a special effect.
And it's like, not all animal deaths in those Italian cannibal movies affect me the same way, because sometimes they feel expressive of the film itself, and sometimes they feel arbitrary.
Yeah.
But eventually, the Cyclops shows up. It's got little Cyclops vision with the like fuzzy little monster vision blurring on the side of the screen. As they just shoot the other actors from a crane or however they do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of actors reacting to nothing.
Because again, it's a Bert I. Gordon movie.
Yeah, they didn't have the tennis ball and a stick back then that they have these days to make the actors look in the right direction.
I will say, okay, so we talked the beginning of the end. When you have all of the special effects are done photographically, you can't have the actors interacting with the effects. Bert I. Gordon said, but what if you could? Mm-hmm. And what he does is he has a scene where the Cyclops reaches down and his hand goes behind the actress as she's screaming. And then he kind of just takes the frame of the movie and pulls it off to the side to the point where you just see blackness, because it's like someone did it's like someone took the frame in MS Paint and used the select tool and then just dragged it to the left and off screen. And it is such, like, again, we talked about beginning of the end is like rough in a way that you're like, audiences of this era would barely be able to tolerate this. The Cyclops, this grabby effect, this solution he came up with to get his actor and the effect to interact, fucking hysterical and way worse.
I'm trying to think of good things. I'm trying to think of some good things. The Cyclops makeup was done by Jack Young, who did Frankenstein.
Not Jack Young.
Wasn't it done by Jack Young? Did I get that wrong?
Frankenstein was done by...
You're right. I got that part right. It was done by Jack Young, who had done...
Jack Pierce did Frankenstein.
Right.
I forgot the last name for a moment. Whoever did the makeup effects in the Cyclops are very good and gruesome. It's not just like a mythological figure where it's like, oh yeah, it's a giant bald being with an eye in the center. It's got like the weird hair lip thing. It's got like weird smushed flesh all over the top of the face. The eye is a little off center in a disgusting way.
Yeah, Jack Young. Okay, here, Jack Young worked on the original Wizard of Oz. That was the thing. Okay. But after this, he starts to do a little bit more interesting stuff, like Murders at the Rue Morgue, Ben. And he did The Evil. Apparently, he was a makeup artist on Apocalypse Now and The Brood. There we go.
You know who's got a little bit of Marlon Brando and Apocalypse Now energy is the amazing Colossal Man, but we'll get there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that this one, if you really squint, there's a little bit of Heart of Darkness in this in this idea of these guys going after uranium, and they keep going deeper and deeper into a bad situation, and they are looking for a dude who is lost.
That's true.
Yeah, you know what? I'm talking myself into it. This is basically Apocalypse Now in
Apocalypse
Mexico.
Now. It's Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and then there's one other key factor, which is a radio show called Escape. There was an episode from 1950 with Vincent Price called Bloodbath. And it is this sort of swashbuckling jungle horror where this group of explorers discovers this massive uranium deposit in the South American rainforest. And one of them, or two of them, try to screw the others by, getting it first and being the first out there and stealing all the supplies, so they're left to die in the jungle. And it's about these, people trying to chase them down, and about all of the horrors of the jungle and the mosquitoes and the stinging, the piranhas, everything. Awesome. If you're ever like, what was like dramatic radio in the 40s and 50s like, and you want to like check out like a cool horror thing, I always recommend Bloodbath from 1950 from the show Escape with Vincent Price. And that is just the Treasure of the Sierra Madre with uranium, literally. And also just a bunch of other killer animals thrown in. So there we go. We're also going to throw in Bloodbath.
And that also kind of sounds like the plot of Monster from Green Hell, honestly. Which is another terrible movie that kind of ruins that idea. I should note that the whole uranium mining thing is something that was actually lost on me, but I happened to be replaying Fallout 4 after watching that TV show, and I realized that two of the songs that you can listen to, because they play like old not quite Tin Pan Alley, but like 50s songs, and there are two separate songs about uranium mining and getting your a fortune uranium mining.
Yeah.
So I had just really known about this idea. And I do wonder how awful that was and how many people died of poisoning and cancers and stuff mining uranium without any expertise whatsoever, just because it was something that they could get a lot of money for.
One of my notes is this valley is like the set of The Conqueror. Because it's like the idea is like the entire valley is just coated in uranium.
Yeah.
Like Lon Chaney's looking around him like he is in like the lost city of gold, like he's in El Dorado.
Yeah.
Like literally anything he can touch is worth thousands or millions of dollars. But like if it's that enriched with uranium, then probably none of them are making it out of there alive, because they are all going to, if not be mutated in the way all the animals in that valley are mutated, they're all going to get cancer.
Yeah. I guess it's a spoiler to say that, yes, the Cyclops is the man they're looking for, and they figured that out. But it is sort of interesting that the female lead, who I honestly didn't write the names of any of the actors.
Gloria Talbot from I Married a Monster from Outer Space.
That's right. And so she's actually pretty good, and it's interesting that she's the one who's kind of paying for this expedition. But it's also interesting that the male lead, who is also the romantic lead, is going along on a trip to find his romantic rival. I think that's kind of a weird touch.
So I really like Gloria Talbot.
Yes.
I mean, mostly because I Married a Monster from Outer Space is great, and she's great in it. But I think she's fine in this, but I will say there is a moment in this movie that that does her character really dirty, which is the Cyclops is revealed. They have several interactions with the Cyclops. There's like a day or two passes that they're aware that there is this giant Cyclops mutated man in this valley. And then at a certain point, she makes a comment that implies she doesn't realize this is her boyfriend that she's looking for. And one of the scientists looks at her like, wait, hold on. You don't understand. I thought we were all on the same page here. That's honey, that's Bruce. Your boyfriend's a Cyclops. And it makes sure he really like obviously the audience knows right away that when they're looking for what happened to her boyfriend, even before they get to the Cyclops, they're watching a movie called The Cyclops. Probably her boyfriend is the Cyclops.
Yeah.
And the fact that she makes it so late into the movie, it is like, now we still got to find Bruce. And they're like, oh, Jesus. I remember thinking okay, maybe this character's kind of dumb.
I do have one note. The guy who plays the romantic lead is James Craig. And my note is this: said, I'm guessing this is the guy you get when you can't afford Clark Gable or his top 3 lookalikes. And then the guy who plays the pilot is Tom Drake, who is mostly for that. All these guys run TV westerns. It's like Gordon just went to the set of whatever TV western was happening nearest him in L.A. and just grabbed a couple guys.
Yeah. This is, I think in all of these cases, like I think this movie was shot in like 10 days. Like I think Lon Chaney's part was shot in like 4 days.
It's 66 minutes long and it feels eternal. It's so boring.
I think probably it's easy to get big actors if it's that quick of a schedule. And they're like, oh, I don't even have to change my TV schedule around. I can literally just slip this movie in. I will say, like, Bert I. Gordon being trash, like, one of the advantages of that is that we do get some pretty gnarly violence. We talked about the gruesome makeup effects of the Cyclops. Mm-hmm. The Cyclops gets a stick set on fire and then jabbed through his eye, and there's just, like, a stream of blood pouring out of his face. Mm-hmm. And that's how he dies. And it's like... oh, gee.
Yeah, it's
like
pretty...
that's such a. I mean, you know, we're Fulci fans on Genre Grinder. We know we're big fans of massive eye damage.
And then I'm also trying to make. At this point in my notes, I'm trying to make notes about gratuitous swimsuit scenes for the women. She does not have a swimsuit scene, but she does get a wet shirt for no reason. She just falls in some water.
All right.
So I feel like that's almost the same thing.
I think, man, that might be a Bert I. Gordon thing because I think beginning of the end has like the sexy lady in the robe, like like Chicago's literally being evacuated because they're going to drop an A-bomb on it, and she's just like brushing her hair in the vanity, and she's not aware that there's a giant grasshopper climbing on her building.
Yeah, well, that shot is clearly just King Kong too.
Yes, and there's another moment that we'll be talking about in the next Bert I. Gordon movie we talk about that is clearly King Kong as well. So again, that's what the Bert I. Gordon method is the rip-off artist.
Yeah. So yeah, that will bring us to the end. And since this is going to be 3 parts, but I'm only recording 2 parts with Patrick, we're just going to record the exact same outro here. And so this is either the end of part 2 or part 3. So if you've heard this before, Patrick, where can they find you?
They can find me at 96 Greer. 96 Greers is the name of my podcast that I'm a co-host of, where we watch every single feature film with Judy Greer in the cast. They can find that at 96 Greers. That's all spelled out, no numbers. 96greers.podbean.com. They can find me on Instagram at Uptown Song Club. They can find me on Blue Sky at Uptown Song Club.
And then, as per usual, you can find me at the Genre Grinder website, at the Genre Grinder Facebook page, I guess the Genre Grinder Twitter page, which is at Genre Grinder. That I don't use my personal Twitter very often, but I do have a Blue Sky as Gabe Powers. Got in there early enough. And I have a letterbox under Gabe Powers, and we have a Genre Grinder / Gabe Powers Instagram at Genre Grinder Gabe. Oh, fuck, I forgot to promote the Patreon. There's also a Genre Grinder Patreon that I keep forgetting to promote, and I'd love to thank everybody on there for the money they give me. I can now cover the cost of hosting the website, so thank you all for that. Until next time, just watch out for big animals. You know, if they get too big, it's just no good. It's just no good. I mean,
medium-sized animals, everybody.
Yep. I'm talking lab or smaller.
Well, I don't know, but I've been told uranium ore's worth more than gold. Sold my cad, I bought me a Jeep. I got that bug and I can't sleep. Uranium fever has done and got me down. Uranium fever is spreading all around. With a Geiger counter in my hand,
I'm going out to stake me some government land.
Uranium fever has done and got me down. Well, I had a talk with the AEC and they brought out